Good evening on a jolly old Sunday again. I've had a bit of an adventure through some of the madness that's befalling us all around. So, how are you? Hey, sunny weather next week. What do we say to that? Hot, hot, hot. We'll have some of that. Global warming, come on, let's have some. That's what I say. Never mind all this morning about it. If it's warmer here, I'm up for that. Good evening, Mood Pit. Joining the dots, Paul and Slipknot. We have sound and vision. We do, and that's got to be good. And we don't have a huge CPU either, so that's good. So we will do the definitions tonight, and that'll be the majority of this live stream, I think. But we will kick off with Prussia because I managed to get the next instalment in the summary being put together by Will Zoll. So that again, I'll just help to, I trust you all that you can discern yourself what you take from it and what you don't. I think this guy might be a bit one-sided on his political thing, but nevertheless, we're going to get data. We're going to get some data that will just add to us understanding what the hell's going on and what kind of force we should be looking at as pushing this as a huge grouping. As we know, the Prussians. So, if we have a little look at... Oh. Now, what's going on there? Yeah, I shouldn't be doing this. If I'm truthful. So now I have to do this again. My apologies, I thought we had it cracked. And there we go. So here we are, now we've got him. And it's the story, Prussiagate, Will Zoll, November the 5th, 2021. It says, this is a story about Prussia. Prussia is an empire that is no more. Is it not? A royal dynasty that is no more. A state that is no more. No more to the public eye, that is. Prussia is now hidden, invisible, and deeply penetrated within almost every nation, state, and the matrix of corporations that control governments. Well, the governments are corporations, or are they not? This is a story about a horrible, invisible enemy. And there we can see the Teutonic flag tied the Holy Roman Empire. So we can see that. It's not the double-headed, but it's still... one would say eagle, but is it a phoenix? It doesn't look... It's a funny-looking eagle, let's put it that way. The story of a big idea, a new world order. Many a wise man knows about the US Act of 1871 that took the function of government away from we the people and into a corporation under the control of a hidden financier. But many may not know that just 1 month before the Act of 1871, the King of Prussia became the Kaiser of a united Germany, and that 4 months after the Act of 1871, a treaty was signed between the US and Great Britain after a century of bitter rivalry, and that the Kaiser was the appointed arbitrator of all disputes that pertain to that treaty. Interesting. So the Germans are arbitrating a treaty between the US and Blighty in 1871. The Kaiser did not care to be the direct beneficiary of the treaty, for he was already the Kaiser of Germany and the British Crown, being that of the House of Hanover was already firmly under his control. Similarly, the Dutch Crown, being of the House of Orange-Nassau, also paid homage to the great Kaiser, as another of his titles was the Prince of Orange. These were the two great trading empires at the behest of the Kaiser. The mighty USA, weakened and bankrupted by civil war, had been rolled onto a corporation and controlled by treaty. The Balkan states too were subject to the Kaiser's final rulings. By 1871, almost the entire world was coming under some form of Prussian control. Now, that's interesting because I remember a conversation I had with a guy who was a member of Blur's Spin cabinet, and he'd found some interesting information in relation to his own family. where it was showing that this position, this Kaiser operating as the arbiter, they did a deal of some sort and ended up moving the base here onto the British Isles. So we're looking at Devizes, we're looking at Marlborough, that particular area of Blighty appears to be where they are. So that was very interesting because he was quite shocked by it, but he did relay that to me. So what we thought to be pushing out of Germany for a long time actually moved here. So principalities were sold, things of that nature, and everything were reorganised with this arbiter of the treaty moving here, which then puts into the picture the idea that the First World War was a complete and utter invention. It was for no other reason than working in sync with this kind of situation. The rise of Prussia, 1871. Since prior to 1871, the rise of Prussia was an epic story of military and diplomatic success. Its territory did not to describe its geographic location, but rather the lands it had conquered. It was really a trial run of the Great Reset. Look at the Baltic pagan lands of Prussia, a 60-year bloody struggle between the Prussian pagan natives and the military order of the Teutonic Knights. With the Pope's blessing, the Teutonic Knights embarked on the Northern Crusades and set about resetting the pagan Prussian lands by giving the pagans the chance to convert or to be executed. The Teutonic Knights have heavily depopulated Prussia and set about repopulating the lands with their very own Germanised Christians. And there we have the insignia of the Teutonic Order. It's a fleur-de-lis there as well, remember, look at that, you know. See, by the 14th century, these Prussian lands, so this is 1300s, were acquired by the princely family of Hohenzollern, dating back to 1061 AD. The Count of Zollern and family embarked on a slow and ambitious pathway of expansion. After establishing their base in Nuremberg, expanding to Brandenburg, then acquiring the Prussian lands, the Hohenzollern family decided to adopt Prussia as the namesake of their growing empire. However, their empire was by no means only about land. It was about establishing a culture of compliance, servitude and militarism. By acquiring the lands of Prussia, the Hohenzollern also acquired the brutal methods of the Teutonic Knight rule. And with that, the mighty military state of Prussia was born. So we looked before to say that there's the old Prussia, which was the original Prussia, which were a decent thing, and we took over by these Teutonic Knights. And from that base, they sort of set up this military, HQ, as it were, for more, you could say, the secret societies. The Hohenzollern family ruled Prussia with military precision, intent on not falling to any of the great powers that surrounded them. Prussia embarked on a culture of perpetual war with the express aim of conquer or be conquered. And of course, we saw that in the 1700s, so the century before this, 1871 time, this force expanded its move through Catherine the Great, who took over Russia, basically. And then all the Khazaria, all those areas were also then scooped into this system under Catherine the Great. You had Napoleon whizzing around as well. So they were destroying all the monarchies. He took on the Hanoverian crown here in Blighty at the beginning of the 1700s. So you can see this is a huge move. We're just looking at from 1871, but previous to that, they pretty much bagged a hell of a lot of Germany, pulling in the Jesuits after they'd been kicked out of the Vatican into this Prussian, Russian shindig going on. And of course, we speak in terms of the Tsars, the Romanovs, being, surviving up to the time when they were annihilated supposedly by the Bolsheviks. However, Peter III, who was the husband of Catherine the Great and thus gave her a position because it's said that she had him murdered, He's at the day in those days was said to be the last Romanov. So who were those after Peter the Great that we're told were then annihilated during the Bolshevik takeover of Russia? So there's so much ambiguity in our history when you start to look at these other little bits, because they're contradicting each other in some cases, and obfuscating other connections and histories, regarding these sorts of lines that are pulling everything together today. Through the WEF. Now, as we've said, they're a bit of a laughingstock they've turned out to be this week, so that's good. It means that people that need to see have started to see that these guys are just absolute crazies with an idea that they managed to get far because of the control of all the media and the big corporate web, as this guy's showing us, it was pretty much set up by this Prussian move. Maintaining a professional standing army at all times, they required the compulsory enlistment of all citizens, using a technique that relied on infiltrating their enemies before invading them. The Kingdom of Prussia rapidly became the most fearsome power in Europe, militarily, diplomatically, and eventually commercially. Prussian militarism was legendary. The Hohenzollern rulers became master statesmen, incorporating espionage and marriage arrangements, which is a way of infiltration, with a king that was raised and reared for war from birth. Hohenzollern Prussia was not only a state dedicated to the art of war, it was a cultural requirement to be part of it. It was a nation in lockstep. Now, the nation that we know as dedicated only to war was the Spartans. And of course, the Spartans claimed to be from Egypt. Homosexuality was compulsory. If a child was born and it wasn't up to scratch, it was thrown off the cliffs in a particular ceremony. And it was just all about war from the minute they're born until they're killed in battle. And the wives, the females of the game, were pretty much kept out of it completely. It was a complete and utter masculine male modus operandi, and it was dedicated to the art of war. So you can see here, we're looking at this Prussia, you've got then connections to that side of things, Sparta, and then back to Egypt, or we're back to Pharaoh again. The great military leadership of Prussia resulted in many feats of victory. Some of the greatest battles ever won during this time were at the hands of Prussia and their kings, the Hohenzollerns. Napoleon himself marvelled at their brilliant military skills. And he says, Prussia was hatched from a cannonball. Of course, Napoleon, his wife Josephine, was a Carolingian. That's interesting to be known. And he subverted the Knights of Malta to this system also. The art of war is an all-encompassing endeavour, but while Sun Tzu's writings on war were epic, the Prussian practice of war was carried out on a scale that was unimaginable. Napoleon knew this all too well, as did one of the great Hohenzollerns, Frederick the Great. So we've got him, he says, "Gentlemen, if this man were alive, we would not be standing here today." And that's Napoleon Bonaparte at the tomb of Frederick the Great. Interesting. The world of that day would witness this centuries-old, semi-landlocked backwater of a principality become a great empire, culminating in one of the greatest victories ever. After their victory over the French in the Franco-Prussian War, the kings of Prussia were crowned Kaiser of Germany in 1871. This was the legend that earned the Kaiser the role of arbiter of the treaty in 1871 between the US and UK. Notably, the Kaiser's word was final in any dispute. Control had been well earned. So you can probably see then how they could move this to end up getting the Brits and the Americans a little bit pissed off with Kaiser Bill, 1871 marked the year the Kaiser, the King of Prussia, the Prince of Orange, commenced the quest for complete diplomatic and financial control of the modern world. The plan to become invisible from 1871 to 1918. Ah, that sounds very appropriate. From 1871 until the eventual abdication of the Kaiser in 1918, the Teutonic culture of Prussia permeated through the world without many even aware it was happening. The origins of modern education akin to indoctrination are Prussian, born out of a philosophy to create a citizenry that is loyal to the state and compliant to state wishes. The word kindergarten had specific Prussian meanings. Well, that's interesting because they kicked it out, the Froebel system. They kicked it out of Prussia, which is very, very interesting because from that time it shifted to London under the auspices of Tavistock. And of course, you know, they demand implicit compliance to the state's wishes. What Froebel had actually come across was the way to get into children by using shapes as to really get something fixed in them, which of course can be used for good or ill. He was obviously using it, Froebel himself, for the benefit of the children. And of course this wouldn't be allowed in a nation that's just obsessed with war and has nothing but absolute obedience to the state. So they kicked it out and it shifted over to London. And I have discussed this before, but from that was created a new system that was sent back to Germany and then educated the Third Reich, the brown shirts. So that generation of children were programmed from the Froebel system that had been kicked out of Prussia, tweaked at Tavistock in London, and then sent back to Germany for education of the brown shirts. So we've had a similar thing here, which started with Blur, when they changed all these education systems, incorporated them, so that the corporations were then actually issuing the curriculum, which I expose, or they exposes pretty well, in two videos I made about 10 to 12 years ago. Crap videos, but excellent listening, just to get a feel, because I pull it out to this woman, you know, and then she's shocked to death because she realised that I might have been... It's quite an interesting ear. It's no good watching it, just listen. So this kindergarten kicked out of Prussia, the Froebel system in particular. Now if we just whip over here, now hopefully that's come through. I'm not sure it hasn't, but I'll read it anyway. And it says, Froebel and the Hitler Jugend, the Britishing of Froebel. And this was by Peter Jackson and Sangwok Lee. Having worked long and hard in the life work of Frederick Froebel, we intended to refresh ourselves by revisiting educational controversies of the early 20th century as recorded in Child Life, the organ of the Froebel Society from 1931 to 1939. The eye-catching title of an article from 1933 drew us into the world of British Froebelians, and there, as we read on, we became aware of a process of transformation whereby Froebel's quintessentially German idealist philosophy became British empiricist Froebelian theory. Froebel inspired the educational innovators of the Third Reich. And this is according to a guy called Dr. Blockman, who was a prominent teacher trainer in the early 30s. Writing in the 1933 edition of the English journal Child Life, she claimed that his ideal of womanhood was about to be released. The National Socialist movement had repudiated what it called the intellectual woman, declaring itself in favour of the warm-hearted mother, practical in word and deed. In the Froebelian outlook in Germany, she spelled her message loud and clear to her British leaders. And it's been quoted from a PDF which you can access on this page, which I'll obviously put up at the end of this. Now it goes on. History. In 1851, the Froebel system was completely banned in Prussia. Okay, so this is in 1851. So this is before the Kaiser became the arbitrator, so 20 years before. So in 1851, the Froebel system was completely banned in Prussia, with this given the importance of its use to program children. The whole system was moved to England, Tavistock Place to be precise. And here is where the original Froebel system would be dramatically tweaked in order they could reprogram the future generations. And by September 1851, the first kindergarten would open at 32 Tavistock Place in Hampstead. So the kindergarten system would be rebirthed through the Tavistock. And then from this move were spawned kindergartens across Western Europe during the remaining decade, and into the Scandinavian countries, Australia, New Zealand, Canada and India. They also took root in America, Canada, Japan, Russia, Turkey, France and Switzerland for the remainder of the 19th century, in disregard from the point of 1851 and its banning in Prussia, which of course is an Illuminati base. Froebel would become the Tavistock programme. Albeit Tavistock had not been announced to the world in its current form, what was presented as the study of the effects of shell shock as Tavistock was formed in the 20th century was the implementation of the new mind control system now in the hands of those controlling the British Crown. So although Tavistock, it hasn't always been called Tavistock, this system has had various names, but it is basically the same. And you know, all this stuff you can find coming out of Adelphi House, which again was the Hanoverians' actual home in London for many a century. So that's the Froebel. Now, I don't know whether this is working, and we're going back. Sorry, what have I done here? We're going back to the Prussians. So I'm hoping that the Prussians is still on. So I'll just have a quick. So the Prussians is back on. So I've think I've sussed how it works. This. So with me doing something wrong. So that's just an insight into the fact that that system was shifted out of Prussia. You know, a nation of war, it has to program its kids not to think for itself, but to obey, banned, move to London. But of course, London at that time was just another part of this system. The Hohenzollerns also embarked on creating a great naval power. While a reasonable attempt was made to create physical ships and subs, the biggest achievement may have been the creation of corporations acting on behalf of nation-states. Wars would lead to treaties with which the Kaiser would become final arbiter, thereafter controlling nations under the guise of admiralty and maritime law. So can we see that this is also tied into why we're all under admiralty and maritime law, yeah? Which, again, is interesting. This is how he's created the Navy, which has then landed on the land, through the riverbanks, and tied us all in that manner. And again, 1933, a key time for that, yeah? Now, of course, this could never have happened if Freemasonry had remained faithful to the realm. So, the mandate of Freemasonry absolutely was changed. Now, if we tie in Jason's work, who is adamant that in 1902 the Phoenix happened, and that everything that we know from 1902 onwards is the beginnings of this. So after whatever happened, the reset that they set up, then we got this. And he's right, so many of the huge corporations that we know, that, you know, from them times and through the wars, etc., were formed in 1902, in 1903. So there's a bit of teeth in that. Again, I call him the bunch of keys. That guy, he's that good. His information's that good. So there we have it: admiralty and maritime law controlling nations, and that's only a guise, but it's mainly this Prussian navy, how it's attached itself on land and trapped us, and operating under the guise, it says there, of admiralty and maritime law. It says, through tried and tested war tactics of infiltration and covert operations, the Kaiser would penetrate every aspect of human life in the Western world, as Teddy Roosevelt knew all too well. Now we're quoting Roosevelt, he said, behind the ostensible government sits enthroned an invisible government, owing no allegiance and acknowledging no responsibility to the people. To destroy this invisible government, to befoul the unholy alliance between the corrupt business and corrupt politics, is the first task of the statesman of today. This unholy alliance, business and politics. And he says, while this sounds ludicrous, it appears we were told by those who knew better. And Otto von Bismarck said, there is a providence that protects idiots, drunkards, children, and the United States of America. So I'm probably talking about the Constitution, or maybe, I don't know. The world truly was beginning to embrace the big idea of a new world order. It would also be exceptionally naive to think that the most influential and powerful corporation of the 20th century, the Federal Reserve Bank, would not have had the invisible Prussian hand involved in its formation. Within a year of its signing, World War I was in full swing. Yeah, absolutely. And then that would trap the British government to this Israel plan, as we've expressed and explored rather, by stopping the Brits surrendering within the first year. The Rothschilds promised to bring in the Yanks, and of course the Rothschilds are tied to Prussia. Woodrow Wilson reminisced on his part of the Federal Reserve Act. He said Woodrow Wilson, after signing the Federal Reserve Act of 1932, said, "I am a most unhappy man. I have unwittingly ruined my country. A great industrial nation is now controlled by its system of credit. We are no longer a government by free opinion, no longer a government by conviction and the vote of the majority, but a government by the opinion and duress of a small group of dominant men." So he said that in 1919. And of course, this is down to the arbitrator. Not the beneficiary of this, but obviously he is, isn't he? Because if you're arbitrating two empires while building your own, you know what I'm saying? So I think by 1919 it was definitely on the table, they could see it. So, you know, as Archduke Ferdinand was assassinated a year later, along with his Hohenzollern wife, yeah, so they definitely weren't assassinated, the world would never be the same again. The plan to take over the world would not just not just lands, but the hearts and minds of every aspect of human action on the planet had just gone live. The horrors and human misery provided a smokescreen to the true plan that was unfolding. The Germans, led by the great Hohenzollern Kaiser and a family heritage of military success, made what seemed to be a fatal mistake. Germany urged Mexico to invade the US. So it was that in 1917, America attacked like never before, declared war on Germany. By 1918, Germany had been defeated and Kaiser had abdicated his throne. Interesting. Again, 1917, it took a... 1914, Brits were ready for surrendering. Not until 1917 did the promise be fulfilled that America would come into the war. I mean, it was just about annihilating the Brits, the males in the nation. So there were no heroism in that at all. And then you've got to mix in the fact that, they were pushing X-ray on people, the soldiers. They were also putting up this radar. And then, of course, the first use of these shots. All on the soldiers who were too sick to fight. And it's no wonder they were getting annihilated. However, there was too many strange things happening in 1917 at the hand of the Kaiser. Had the stage been set for the complete disappearance of the Hohenzollern dynasty from public statehood? Let's look at some significant happenings in 1917. The infamous Zimmermann telegram drew America into the war. The British royal family changed their name from Saxe-Coburg-Gotha to Windsor. The family of the future husband of Queen Elizabeth II changed their name from Battenberg to Mountbatten. The Kaiser gave Lenin millions to finance his campaign of Bolshevik Red Terror in Russia. Yet the Kaiser gave Lenin. Yeah? So this is the Kaiser of Germany building up this Bolshevik nonsense in Russia, which then came back to give cause for Adolfo and the Hitler, and the Balfour Declaration was signed. So there you go. There's our tie-in then to this Prussian game of setting up this fire starter in the Middle East. It starts to make sense as a huge agenda. This is not, and it's not biblical. This is the thing. says these seemingly minor actions serve two purposes: hide all signs of the Kaiser's markings on the world and unleash a chain of chaos upon the world that made the 20th century potentially the bloodiest of all human history. However, all of this paled in comparison to the mother of all weapons that was to be bestowed on humanity: a weaponized mass psychosis for the express purpose of transferring unimaginable wealth and power to global corporations and those who control them. Exactly. All our states are incorporated. The governments are actually corporations. What are they doing? They're operating under bankruptcy administration. Therefore, the banks are organising how we, the taxpayer, pay the debt of this corporate government while handing all our services over to its mates, the corporations, as outsourced providers. And then, so your council executives, they're operating for this. Yeah, your councillors, they're nothing. They're nothing because they're nothing about them, for a start. They should know this stuff because English law stops this stuff. A bankrupt corporation gets folded. Why are these governments not being folded? All debts are off. We get back to the realm. Away we go. Who cares what the UK signed into all these global treaties? Because it is that government that signed into them. Then we can start to see the treason, because these are still being given the HM government. Yeah? And now, as I understand it, if it doesn't specifically say her, it's just H, it actually means his. Back to the potential that the Privy Council is holding on to all these changes that have been made under this reign in readiness for the return of the King. Yeah? And that's a way that they would have changed our constitution, still in sync with what they class as honour, because we're too stupid to know what the hell's going on. Yeah? And it's as Greg would say, it's an acclamation rather than a reality. So there's no oath being taken correctly. They're being acclaimed as the monarch, as was Elizabeth II. So, even that is still in the mix, in my opinion, as a potential of making sense of some of that data. So, of course, a weaponized mass psychosis for the express purpose of transferring unimaginable wealth and power to global corporations and those who control them, fascism was born. Yeah, Mussolini was asked to define it, and he said, when the corporations merge with the civil system, fascism is in place. So here it's born in 1917, and the Kaiser ensuring that the Nazis would rise because, of course, he's funding the Bolsheviks, who were starting to cause trouble in Germany, hence the rise of Hitler. The death of the state of Prussia, the birth of the horrible invisible enemy. The decisions made in 1917 by the Kaiser set the world on a pathway to one of the worst centuries in human history. These horrific decisions were made by a Kaiser who had been entrusted to oversee the most powerful treaties in the world. The most significant powers on earth had placed their trust in the Kaiser due to an impeccable family heritage of military and diplomatic success. The war economy was in full swing. It's almost inconceivable that these decisions were made, but even more inconceivable what followed. The Kaiser now abdicated, retreated back to the House of Orange in the Netherlands, where he spent the rest of his days. Russia was in the midst of a bloody civil war involving the Bolshevik Reds, a campaign led by Lenin, financed by the Kaiser. But a lot of that money you can trace coming via London through Wall Street and back. I've studied a lot of that information. It's not a hidden thing if you seek to see where people like Lenin, Trotsky were being funded. And it's all the places where this system has full control. The naval side of things. So, as we've discussed before, after the Civil War in England, and they got the puppet monarch Charles II, who was as baroque as they come, let's be fair about it, then we got the Bank of England. Here they come, So they moved then the headquarters of the this financial system and the naval headquarters to the inner city of London. The inner temple, the crown temple, this system. So it has nothing to do with England. It's its own sovereign state, and it's tied into the Holy See via the Vatican. So once removed from where the power really is, the Holy See is stuck the Vatican. So perfect now as Vatican II's become what, the liturgy, if you will, of the whole show. It's clever stuff how they've done this, and they've just distracted us all the way since the beginning of the First World War. Russia was in the midst of a bloody civil war involving the Bolshevik Reds. A campaign led by Lenin, financed by the Kaiser, was not dissimilar to modern-day colour revolutions. Of course not. So you're looking at these billionaires, this is what they're fronting. Right, so what is he called? Elon Musk has bought Twitter, super guy. I'm now bored from Twitter. I haven't done anything, I've been very good. And I'm bored it all of a sudden. So you tell me that Elon Musk is anything but just another piece of shite, and I'm not believing it. The Middle East was beginning a tumultuous century between Jews and Muslims. Yep. Adolf Hitler in 1919, as a loyal German military man, despite coming from Austria, was assigned to infiltrate and spy on the German Workers' Party, DAP, and remember infiltration instead of invasion. The rise of Hitler and the devastation that followed would not have been possible without the compliance of the German citizenry and their future staunch allies, being a state of mass psychosis, which, if you remember in one of the older videos, we discussed that was begun by the mutilation, apparently, of a young German girl, Catholic, and then apparently the son of the perpetrator came out and said, my father did this, who turned out to be Jewish. And it looks by all accounts that it just didn't even happen, but it was enough to create this psychosis and division between the German Jewish communities and the Germans. Because, of course, that's what the Bolsheviks do, isn't it? That's how they work, Infiltrate, divide, conquer. Where are we? A collective unconscious would suffer tragedies that could only be induced by leaders of complete incompetence or maniacally brilliant. So, yeah. The economic disaster that befell Germany through the 1920s, known as the Weimar hyperinflation, was not an accident but a planned event. The war reparations were impossible to pay back. History shows that the hyperinflation wiped out the entire middle class. Exactly what they're doing now. Because they were reparations because of war for the Germans. Now you're all paying reparations, but for all the money they've spent on bailing out the banks and the last 2.5 years, as all the money's been siphoned into now the HIV/AIDS industry. That's what's now running all this system. Yeah, that's why you've had HIV/AIDS being popped about. HIV hasn't been isolated, but yes, an acquired immune deficiency is all and everywhere. Is it not? So you can see same kind of thing going out here. Middle class is going to be wiped out. That's the intention. When faced with nothing, the German people were forcefully opened up to the ideologies of socialism and its radicalised Bolshevik companion. Faced with abject poverty, moral depravity began to blossom, especially in Berlin, known as the Sin City. Outbreaks of violence between rival ideologies increased. Corruption was rampant and was being coupled with thuggery. And of course, you've also now got this frugal system educating or programming the youth ready for this symbol of worship, Adolfo. And above there, you've got the symbol of Hitler, brown shirts. Now, of course, the green shirts, aren't they? Because the division, purity of race was their main thing, and how their parents had screwed it. Today, of course, it's climate and how your parents have screwed it. It's like, that's the game. Same old story, just a different narrative. And then you've got Antifa there, When the German people lost everything, they lost all. They desired a strong man, someone that could unite them as they once were under the might of Kaiser. That man was Adolf Hitler. He espoused a new type of socialism, National Socialism, which of course is Bolshevism. If ever you wanted to know. But then there is a guy that I looked at a lot of his work quite an interesting guy. He's uber right wing though. That's the only problem. Obviously, he's gone to the extremes. But you know, he's citing books, and you can't ignore the fact that this was written back in the day. But yeah, he presented information that showed that actually it was a Bolshevik paid agent, and he was spying on not only the National Socialist Party, but also government as well, wherever he could sort of wheedle his way in to become a knower of what was going on. So there's again interesting, but of course, Bolshevism, National Socialism, same thing. It's the same. Bolshevism, of course, is just more of a violent sort of Marxist method of it, whereas the finance side is another part of it. You know, capitalism again the same, because both communism and capitalism have one aim, and that is monopoly. You know, both they do exactly that and nothing else. You know, and that a lot of people, if you can contemplate that and grasp it, that principle, you will never see left and right as separate again. That it's a construct, and it is, as we explored before, it's the method by which they can divide up a nation and then put each of them into a fixed feedback loop that all by events that they create and how the media spin it can only further put you deeper into that feedback loop. So you know, to pull you out of it is an immense task, and usually takes some extreme event in your life. So you know, we've looked at that kind of stuff, and it's all over this stuff, isn't it? You've got your Froebel, you've got all this programming. It's all part and parcel of this machine. Where are we there? This was a form of governance where if everyone complied and moved into lockstep, people would be rewarded with a new era of prosperity. Well, haven't people just been given that as well as an idea? If we all work together, we're all in it together, but some are more raised above and clapped than others, so you're not quite in it all together. You'll be rewarded with yet more hassle at the airports. You're still paying the same price as everybody else, blah de blah. So you've got con there, but it looks like they're being laughed at now by people that matter in the world, and that's got to be good for everybody. Germany would implement the socialist principles that people wanted or needed by issuing. See, that's the thing. They wanted what they actually needed, which were food, which was some kind of economy again, you know. So it was a need. So obviously they wanted it. So of course, once they create that need, then they can make sure they're the ones providing that need. Again, we went into that with the Epstein. So it's just where that works. It's, you know, these people are excellent at working out what you like. The more twisted it is, they're going to offer it you. Once you've succumbed and you're taking it off them, by each method they ask you to pay back by doing something for them, you then debauch yourself and end up at the same level as them, which is what a lot of our politicians today, especially on the right, but then it's not the left also, are under our older politicians, right down to Boris and that generation as well, which you get insight to by following Cameron when he were Thatcher's little lackey. So it all starts to make sense, but now we can see that the entire world is pulling away from this left crap, because of course, as great as Trump was as a president for his nation, and the fact that he weren't actually telling any lies, as bizarre as what he was saying was, that's because that's how bizarre the reality is. But like I said, his main role has been to not remind, but teach all Americans that, hang on a minute, you're not Americans, you're actually right wing. So once they've pulled America into that left-right divide, now they're ready to move this rise of the right wing, which, as much as I can see the mechanic, and I've said to Muslims I know and people like that, it's going to turn around on you. You know, the more nonsense and stupidity that you show, as you've started to get more and more of your own ear, and more and more of your guys have hooked into this money game and are now pushing it into you, and then telling you God's rewarding you. The more you've sucked into that, the more your characters are coming out. And that's what people are starting to see. This is the play that they're playing. So that when it turns around, you're not going to have a leg to stand on. You know what I'm saying? And it's the way the game works. Because if you're claiming to be operating according to a particular book, and you're not, that's how this shadow manages to catch you and have you up country. Slowly, bit by bit, but the end of it, you're complete contrary to what it is you believe you're in sync with. And that it's not just afforded to Muslims, it's afforded to Christians, to Jews, but everybody. You know, just because you believe something doesn't mean it's meaningless if it's not in tune with what it is you're thinking, you're following. And that's how the shadow gets you. I mean, we can deceive each other all day. It's easy, but there's always a comeback because it's the way of the world. But you can get away with that for quite a while down here if you're quite a good liar and you've got a hell of a memory. You can get away with that, but it always comes to an end. Well, it's no different if you're fooling yourself. You're actually lying to yourself, because you're making a claim of yourself that you just can't come up to scratch with. And as Lao Tzu says, first rules of war is know thyself and know your enemy. Because if you don't know yourself, you're kidding yourself in whatever it is you apply yourself to, because you're not actually up to it and you haven't took the time to see whether you're up to it or whether you need to brush up on certain things, Like for me now, I'm moving back onto this law stuff now as an important factor in what I'm actually doing right now. So I'm now pulling myself back together in a different mode, and I need to reappraise myself with certain subject matter relating to it, because when I'm off onto all sorts of things, which is still important, you focus to that, you've not focused to something else. So we change all the time, and that's the way we learn. Germany would implement the socialist principles that they needed. And these contracts will be issued to none other than some of the largest corporations on the planet, so born the fascist Nazi regime. I've missed a bit out there. It says Germany would implement the socialist principles that the people wanted or needed by issuing contracts to perform the tasks needed to achieve that. And exactly what's happening now on person, and you're actually contracting with corporations. You think you're contracting with your state, or you don't even know you're contracting, you just think you're dealing with your state. You're not. Your state doesn't belong to you anymore. It's not of the people. It's of this. And you're contracting with a private, for-profit corporation. The psychology of fascism was first documented by Wilhelm Reich's The Mass Psychosis of Fascism. Hitler had the book publicly burnt and Reich fled Germany, finally reaching the US. Oddly enough, in stark contrast to the First Amendment, the FDA ordered all of Reich's books to be destroyed in the 1950s, where the US and Germany... So he's asking a question, by the 1950s, was the US and Germany already in lockstep? I'd say absolutely, and I'd say they were getting there by the time we got to by 1917, when they managed to drag them in, because obviously the Federal Reserve had been going 4 years. So I'd say they were pretty much in lockstep, especially after the First World War, and especially after the Second World War, because that's when America became the leading light of this Prussian naval force, administered from the inner city of London. After the historic economic hardship and violence faced by the German people, fascism arrived as a solution, not a problem. So when it came in, it wasn't seen as a problem, it was seen as a solution. Just as just took place now, but now you're seeing it's not a solution, it's a means to an end. Amidst the current violence, economic misery and moral depravity, fascism also provided the answer. It provided jobs, crushed the violence on the streets, banned the homosexuality and rampant drug use from its streets. Problem, reaction, solution. The Prussians were not gone, they were just invisible. They've got your states doing it for them. So it's the Russian dolls, isn't it? You look at, even history now looks at it and says it's the German state, the German people. Yeah. No, the controllers of it are now hidden behind the German thing. It's the people, went with it. That's because of the programming. The mass psychosis had the Germans moving in lockstep in fear of falling back into the abyss of the 20s, brimming with the false empowerment Hitler had given them. The false empowerment would see them remain silent in front of the greatest atrocities to occur in human history. Consider that if everyone commits a war crime, then no one does. This is lockstep. This, the virtues of fascism. This was a nation under mass psychosis. 1917 had commenced the great pandemic of fascism and did not end until the end of World War II. As Germany once again collapsed under the weight of horrendous military decisions by a leader who was completely enamoured with Hohenzollern, nostalgia, and the return era of the Prussian era, the atrocities undertaken by a nation under mass psychosis shocked the world. Well, the portrayal of the atrocities is what shocked the world. Whether they really happened or not is another story. But certainly the way the entire war was presented to us, well, at the time, and then through history, through film, drummed into us, has given us the baby boomer generation who says every year we will remember them having handed over everything the ones who are remembering fought and died to prevent. So is the psychosis. Yeah? That is the psychosis. Now, I know I give you guys an hard time. It's because I'm trying to make you snap out of it. Because it's never too late. But that's what you've become as a reality. Although you don't see yourselves that way, that is actually what you are carrying out. And have been since you were kids. Because you've been brainwashed like everybody else and my generation with The Great Escape, 633 Squadron. You know what I'm saying? That's not how it went down. At all. Ironically, trials were held at one of Hohenzollern's first territories. Nuremberg executions were carried out, and in 1947 the world witnessed the total removal of Prussia from existence. Oh, hip hip hooray. I don't think so. The Prussians annihilated the German race and completely or almost annihilated the British as a power, because it's now all under and dancing to this. With the Kaiser abdicating in 1918 and the Prussian state abolished, the entire history of Prussia and its war crime culture disappeared. From the ashes of World War II, only one thing remained. The corporations had all carried this fascist virus. They were now the largest corporations on the planet and commenced the task of penetrating every aspect of human existence. Prussia had now become invisible. From here on, it would operate in the shadows. It had a simple vision that started in 1871 when the conditions were right to take over the world. And then he's got a video of George Bush and his famous 1990 speech. The horrible invisible enemy, fascism, is the marriage between big government and big corporations. Well, didn't David Cameron usher in the big society? Yeah? So big government, big corporations want the big society to play along. With the Cold War threatening to destroy the world, America and Russia needed weapons technology as quickly as possible. How was this going to be paid for? In Russia, communism was destroying its economy, and so draconian labour strategies were employed. Slave labour can be very profitable for corporations. In a very familiar pattern, dissenters were crushed and sent to the gulags, forming the Gulag archipelago described by Alexander Solzhenitsyn. In the US, the Federal Reserve Bank Act passed in December 1913, and this also saw the establishment of the IRS, which, importantly, is now the collector of taxes on behalf of the Bank for International Settlements, or the World Bank, which is subservient to the BIIS. So this is why the 1099s, etc., are important, even here in Blighty and Canada and Australia. We're all tied into this IRS acting as government tax collector. Okay, so that's one to keep in mind now, so that you can start to get on board with what Chris Hauser has put to you, because he's not hiding anything. You know, he's giving it to you, and full kudos to the man. Full kudos. The progressive increase in taxation of the people would suffice in paying for the new Cold War threat. The people agreed and moved in lockstep. And of course, behind the Iron Curtain, they were building the corporation China, which we were concerned about because, of course, foreign imports was Japan. That was the fuss. And also the fear was pushed to was nuclear annihilation at any minute. And of course, there were plenty of lunatics in the 1980s that sucked onto the Greenpeace and PISH. It could have formed its own country. There were that many of them. Even teachers in school tried it on. I just used to piss myself. Like I was going to get under a table. I don't think so. Mr. McCaffrey, I do declare, was the one that got excited at my programming centre. So the big rise of big government, the rise of the big corp. This was the same big corp model that made huge profits from the rise of Nazi Germany. Fascism too was on its way. JFK, Reagan and Trump all tried to warn us. Another surviving remnant of the fall of the Nazi Germany was the Muslim Brotherhood. And now this is important as well. I know probably a lot of you know about that, but Hitler had ties to this Islamic nonsense. We're not talking about Muslims, real Muslims, that are not kafir by their own book. The kafir side of it is this Islamist Muslim Brotherhood section of it, and other offshoots, Baktashi, and all the Tashi, all these little offshoots that are tied not to the Quran, but tied to the Islamist version of it. Formed in 1928, they formed an immediate alliance with Hitler, who financed much of the Muslim Brotherhood with the assets confiscated from the Jews. Well, I'm not so sure about that. Who met their fates in the concentration camps? Well, not many did, apart from the outbreaks of a lot of dysentery and such like that. Most of them were being funneled in to create Israel. And that's documented stuff, it's in books of the day. After World War II, the Muslim Brotherhood received much of their funding from Saudi Arabia. Yeah. So that obviously the Muslim Brotherhood was big in Saudi Arabia. So that was brought under the wing of this system in the First World War. Lawrence of Arabia, that's what he was doing, That's what happened there. So the Saudi princes and kings were on board by the end of the First World War. So that's why it's centred in Saudi. On the run for war crimes and also getting purged from the strongholds in Egypt, the Muslim Brotherhood was eventually rounded up by British intelligence, who handed them over to the CIA. Right? So the Muslim Brotherhood, when it was a power, was receiving its funding from Arabia, but then was handed over to the CIA, who obviously trained them, because the CIA is this Prussian force inside America. Yeah, that's what it is, OSS. British intelligence, which is not, it's Prussian intelligence, East India companies. That's why it's an international and global network, and which is why it has its underworld connections, because it will pushing opium. So all your Eastern secret societies, your triads, the Muslim, all these Orders of the Dragon, all these societies were mainly formed during the East India deal in opium all across the East. And of course they see it as English, British. It's not. It's this system. Like China, the government's having serious problems that you're not getting to see, and it's because this communist regime is basically this Prussian system, as John Coleman told us. He thought he was going in fighting communism when he joined MI5 or MI6 and realised that they were actually implementing communism. Yeah. So there you go, your CIA rounded up, and the Muslim Brotherhood handed over to the CIA. So that's this system. The CIA, formed after World War II, did not present the Muslim Brotherhood for war crimes. Instead, they sent many of them off to Saudi Arabia, where they became deeply embedded within the nation, particularly in the schools. They are therefore the Islamo-fascist religion known as Wahhabism. Okay? So this is what's picking up all the Muslims in the Western nations, and I'm dragging them off into this kafir ideology. And I say that, and I'll say it again, not because I say it, but because that's what the Quran says. That if you're not obeying the commands of the Quran, then you are not a true Muslim, and then you are classed as kafir, and then it's pretty stern with what it says is to be done. I think you've lost sight of that, a lot of you guys, Other members of the Brotherhood set up an underground base in Germany from which they would operate internationally. It is claimed the Muslim Brotherhood provided humanity with the benefits of Saddam Hussein, Osama bin Laden, al-Baghdadi, Hamas, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and possibly even Iran, with all the wars and terror that has come with this regime. Well, of course, it was this system, Prussian system, via the CIA and MI6, that removed the Shah when he decided to get stuff. We'll keep our own mineral rights, thanks, of which there are many, and put on the Ayatollah. You know, so this is who it is. It is claimed that Hillary Clinton's top. So the Iranian people are not interested in this battle that they've been forced into between Israel and itself. That's why I say that Israel was set up as a fire starter. That's because that has to come to pass in this Chabad Messianic Rebbe's interpretation of the Talmud, the Zohar, and sticking it on the back of the Old Testament. That's how I've seen it. It's claimed that Hillary Clinton's top aide, Huma Abedin, is from a family with very close ties to the upper echelon of the Muslim Brotherhood. It is claimed that Obama may have had his Harvard law degree financed by Al-Walid bin Talal, one of the richest Saudis in the world. It is claimed that ex-CIA director John Brennan may have converted to Wahhabism. So there you can see, because these people are all about control systems. Whatever works best for them. They don't give a toss about anything spiritual. This is about corporatism, So whatever system works for them at any given time will be given support. But as I keep saying, it's not actually true Quranic Islam. This is this Islamist nonsense that has been formed through these connections to the Prussians via Hitler. The origins, or perhaps the origins of the CIA, may have had dubious ties to international fascism and exceptionally close ties to Nazi Germany, notably GHWB's father, Prescott Bush, had his company assets seized in 1942 under the Trading with the Enemy Act for affecting banking for the Nazi regime. What was the sentence for this crime? GHWB became CIA director, the same CIA that let the Muslim Brotherhood, or the Islamic chapter of the Nazis, thrive in Saudi Arabia and in Germany. Since 1945, the world has not stopped suffering under the Kaiser's decisions in 1917. Communism would never have spread to China and beyond if it was not for the stronghold it managed to gain in Russia. Mao Zedong, Pol Pot, and many other monsters would have not been born into authority. And of course, Kissinger and Carrington, Kissinger associates, were very involved in these regimes of Mao Zedong and Pol Pot. And of course, they're handing over. I can't remember who it is that's taken over from Kissinger, but I'll have a look for that. We may not have seen radical Islam in its terror attacks, the war on terror, the rise of the government through massive taxation, the rise of the super global corporations which are larger than nations. This all led to the 100-year march of the central bank, placing the world into debt trap that would place nations into debt servitude for generations to come. The Prussians were not gone; they were just invisible. The world was in a war so insidious that it was impossible to detect. The world was being attacked by a strategy so ambitious and with such a deadly intent that it was impossible to believe. The world was being attacked by an enemy that no longer used geography as a battlefield but psychology. This was an enemy that made us think we had won the battle so that they could win the war. This is the horrible invisible enemy, and this is Prussia Great. We'll continue that next week, otherwise we're not going to have much time to get cracking on with these definitions. But you can see that we can see it now and say, look, this is this Prussian force that's moving in sync through the corporations against all nations, not just, as they say, the Jews, There might just be one other thing I want to have a look at before we... Right, so another thing that's not gone through as expected is these climate proposals which have failed to pass the European Parliament. And he says key pieces of EU climate legislation failed to pass the European Parliament on Wednesday. In a series of dramatic votes, lawmakers refused to adopt positions on the reform of the EU's carbon market, the introduction of a carbon border tax, and the establishment of a social climate fund, following Conservative-led efforts to water them down. So we can see now we're going to have a shift to the right wing. You know, all this leftist garbage, and it's a lot bigger than people think, because it does incorporate a lot of this encouragement that a lot of Muslims have been given to act contrary to the nation's laws in here and in others that they're on. So we can see now they've got everything in place. A lot of these Islamists have shown themselves stupid. Everybody then thinks every Muslim's like that. But they are being pulled into it as well. I can see that, you know, and we have to have facts on the table, and let's not piss about wishing and guessing. We know what's going on, and everything has to turn around if this is to not ground and earth in the future as this rise of the right continues, because it's going to happen. It's got to happen, because it's gone beyond the pale, as it were, you know. How we deal with these situations is going to be the important side of things, you know. So by 340 to 26 votes and 34 abstentions, has pretty much wrecked again. So we've had the laughing stock that is the WF. The Bilderberg is on, and we've got a G7 at the end of this month, and a few of our boys are over there where they shouldn't be, prepping for G7, Boris included. So there's a lot going on, because these things are not going according to plan. So again, we need to keep that in mind. You know, not everything that they want. We know what they want. It's created a lot of fear in people, but now we can see it's starting to. It's getting opposition. So this is why you mustn't get laid back on your laurels now. You know, you've got to keep encouraging your councillors, encouraging your politicians, encouraging even your media to start talking about this. The fact that it's, you know, people are now starting to see it as the garbage that it is. And we can start to put out, well, why they're doing it, and people start to understand that. Then we know what we don't want. We can start bringing up ideas that we do want, that we should all be living by. I would suggest it's got to be a lot better if we can do that. Now, so there we go. I hope that's expanded our knowledge of this Prussian move that we're all under. Because no matter what we look at it, we can tie it into legal person, we can tie it into Admiralty and Maritime law, so it's all fitting in. But remember that it's actually the front, Admiralty and Maritime is actually a front for the Prussian Navy. The Prussian Navy, which is the American Navy, because it's still under the yoke of the Prussians via the inner city of London, its crown temple. And of course, the shenanigans going on now here with this next monarch, the return of the king, is another move in cementing this Prussian garbage as being accepted because it's acclaimed not by fact of law. You know, it's important that we recognise this, especially baby boomers, because you're the ones that are depending on to remain fooled by what's happened in this last reign. You know, through the First and Second World War. You're the ones that it's essential to keep in this smog, because they've got the young ones, they don't know their ass from their elbow. Right now, for the Third Reich advance under this climate programme they've got. And they're going to starve themselves of nutrients and proteins and all sorts because of the other sides of these so-called woke agendas that they've got cracking on everywhere, you know. So that sort of stuff actually needs to be, it really does need to be addressed and not forgotten. So what are you guys saying? I hope that was informative anyway. Hello everybody. We are saying we do. All crap weather, hope for some sun. Oh, it's going to be hot next week, they're saying. And they're saying 10 days that they can see so far that it's going to last. Well, of course, if they're going to try and dry out France, then we're going to get a bit of a poke at it as well. So I don't mind. Hello, so everybody saying, oh, good. Guidance 2222. Oh, cause lad. So Prussians were the bad guys. Well, for me, it ties into what we are. What are the Templars? Their ideologies. Knights Hospitallers, because all these operations were formed in Crusade. And of course, when they'd gone over there and witnessed another way to control, they came back and created the banking system and started to cause havoc with the monarchies. We're not disputing the ins and outs of who were the good guys, who were the bad guys, but we have to look at what we're dealing with today is a direct result of the secret societies that were formed back in the days of the Crusades. The Holy Roman Empire, as opposed to what was the Church Empire. Because it is important stuff that we at least acknowledge this thing. That not always has everything been as bad as it's been portrayed. So I just don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater in anything that's carried out in the future. Because what they're depending on is just losing all the ancient knowledge, and they're putting this new script together. As the insiders said, that the script for the future is already written. It is. It's the Gaia garbage, the pish, the New Age pish, the absolute garbage under this rather twisted system called the 7 Laws of Noah. Sending blessings, people. Thank you very kindly. Hit thumbs up, people. Good day, public holiday for the Queen's birthday today in South Wales. Is it indeed? Oh, well, enjoy it. Enjoy it. And share on Facebook. Thank you very kindly. Good evening to Winston Smith. Right, definitions. I have been promising them. Now, I think it's going to work, but so I'll flip over to the definitions. I won't be able to see myself if you can see them, because I'll only be able to see what we're going to do, but you should be able to screen share what I'm seeing. So I'll flip it over. If you can just say yay or nay in the chat, somebody, and then I know then that it's working and we can do it that way. So if you can just help me out in that respect. Oh, wait a minute, I better flip it over first. So now I should be. So you're supposed to be seeing whatever I see. Can you see a shed load of folders? Just a yeah or no, and then I'll. Have you all died? Could you see them folders? I take it nobody's. You can't actually hear me, can you? Right. Excellent. Thanks for that. Okay, so we can now go through some definitions. I thought we'd kick off. Just have a look at. These are just definitions that I've been doing a lot of refiling and sorting things out, so I've got a bit of sense to me madness over this last few years that I've collected. So I've been starting to correlate things together, and these are just stuff that I've found that I thought, well, that's interesting to know because it's written. Sometimes I've sourced it, sometimes I haven't. I've noticed, which I'm a bit annoyed at. So let's have a look at the old car and DVLA, because that's pissed me off this year. Now, this one, so if I put this into the centre, we're looking at this one. It's DVLA in breach of the GDPR. And this was posted by Parking Cowboys on 18th of August 21. It says a firm of lawyers is putting together a group litigation claiming that the DVLA are in breach of the General Data Protection Regulations by selling registered keeper data to private parking companies. Yeah? Which is a breach, isn't it? Let's be honest. Where parking companies wish to issue a parking ticket by post, they need to get the data from the DVLA. How interesting. The DVLA offers this service, charging the parking company £2.50 per go. In 2018, the DVLA received over 16 million from this service. Fucking hell. The case is being brought by Keller Lenker, and the basis of their case is that data is provided for vehicle registration purposes, and the DVLA or breaching the regulations by using it for different purpose and generating an income from that. They are looking for cases where keepers have received a private parking charge since 2016 to add to the group litigation. And then it offers a link, but we can't get off this image. I don't know how that panned out, to be quite frank, but I'm betting it's going to be in some small print somewhere. Either the original title that we never get to see, that they create when they assign a registration number to the VIN number, but then it should be it has to be in the contract it would have to be in the V5 contract. So I'd have to check that side of things out before I would go with that. Then we've got this, which you're probably aware about, which is that the reason why they got rid of the tax station was because it clearly shows private like goods. And it says, here is proof that if you believe you are trading in commerce by marking your car as goods vehicle. Notice PLG. This is why they don't use tax sticks anymore, because they got caught out. So is that the case? Again, are they being naughty? Now then, the state owns your car. I think this is coming out of America, but I'm not sure. It says, the truth is coming out. The means of reclaiming ownership will eventually follow. On February 10th, 1987, Tennessee Department of Revenue Operations Supervisor Denise Rotterow told Judge Geer how Tennessee's auto registration works. The process begins with the surrender of the manufacturer's statement of origin, MSO. We call it a VIN number as well, don't we? By the auto dealer to the Department of Revenue in exchange for a certificate of title. Asked if an MSO is proof of ownership or legal title to the automobile, Mrs. Rotterow said, yes. Are you telling me that the ownership of an automobile is not title? It's merely evidence that title exists. Your car's legal title is the MSO, which the dealer surrendered to the state. MS Rotterow said the MSO is put on microfilm for permanent keeping. The original destroyed, and the original destroyed. Now then, where would that work then? So it's a copy of an original, but the original doesn't. What's that? Where would that work? Do they not incriminate themselves? There must be a reason why they've destroyed the original. After the trial, spectators expressed shock that the personal automobiles were actually owned by the state. No wonder state law offers stop. No wonder state law officers stop people for no reason, said a housewife. If your car's got a Tennessee plate, it's theirs, and they can do anything they like to you. That's the law. But it's voluntary. No one but Judge Greer has dared to say it. If you don't surrender your car to the state in exchange for the plates, you go to jail. Editor's note. This is true not only for Tennessee, but for the other 49 states as well. When purchasing a new automobile, the buyer is required to sign fine print which authorises the dealer to obtain plates and registration for the vehicle. All right, yeah, so we actually do authorise it. The purchaser need only read this fine print to see that by doing this they are authorising the dealer to act a power of attorney. And by doing so, the prospective buyer is signing away his rights to that vehicle. Or by person, this, remember. When buying a used vehicle, the title already has been signed over to the state. And that's from the investigative reporter, October 1996. So where I've said it's the tie to the VIN number, to the registration plate, it's the same kind of thing. So they destroy the original title, and why would they do that, I wonder? Let's have a look. What could we have a look at now? Let's have a look here. It says definition, democracy. Philia, it's come from. And it says, for Aristotle, democracy is possible only within homogeneous ethnic groups, while despots have always reigned over highly fragmented societies. Well, that makes sense, doesn't it? And the reason why they want multiculturalism everywhere. It stops an existing democracy from functioning. Yeah, so that's an interesting point to note. A multi-ethnic society is thus necessarily anti-democratic and chaotic, for it lacks philia. This profound flesh and blood fraternity of citizens. Yeah. Tyrants and despots divide and rule. They want the city divided by ethnic rivalries. The indispensable conditions for ensuring a people's sovereignty accordingly resides in its unity. Ethnic chaos prevents all philia from developing. A citizenry is formed on the basis of proximity, or it is not formed at all. The abstract integrationist doctrines of the French Revolution envisage man as simply a man, a resident, a consumer, civic spirit like public safety and social harmony, and it's based not on education or persuasion alone. Why I didn't copy anymore, I don't know. But that is pretty much Aristotle's idea of how and why a democracy will work. Of course, Plato, presenting Socrates, says different. He says it can never survive because by nature of trade you're going to be getting different people in with power, and that's going to subjugate or subvert democracy, because it has to be flesh and blood fraternity. So that's, again, something people need to bear in mind as to if you're arguing against multiculturalism, especially when people are coming in doing things they're not supposed to be by their own book. Do you have another reason to show why what they're doing isn't correct? Administration law definition. I don't know what book this is taken from, but it's Precedents in Law, and it says Administrative Law, 1896. This the law governing the organisation and operation of administrative agencies, including executive and independent agencies. So that's even the executives. And the relations of administrative agencies with the legislature, or the executive and the judiciary, and the public. So administrative law is the law governing the organisation and operation of administrative agencies, okay, and it includes all of those. Administrative law is divided into three parts. One, the statutes endowing agencies with power and establishing rules of substantive law relating to those powers. So any agency created is governed by that. Two, the body of an agency made law consisting of administrative rules, regulations, reports or opinions containing findings of fact and orders. And three, the legal principles governing the acts of public agents when those acts conflict with private rights. So that's why they have to get you to give up your private rights, because they need you to be operating under legal principles, or administrative law cannot be carried out. Cases, administrative law and procedure. And it says administrative law deals with the field of legal control exercised by law administrating agencies other than courts, and the field of control exercised by courts over such agencies. And that's Felix Frankfurt, The Task of Administrative Law, 75 U, PA, L Rev, 614, 615 and 1927. Administrative law is to labour law, securities regulation, and tax what civil procedure is to contracts, torts and commercial law. Administrative law studies the way government institutions do things. It is therefore the procedural component to any practice that affects or is affected by government decision makers other than just the courts. Its study goes beyond traditional questions as it explores a variety of procedures, and it develops ideas about decision making and decision makers. And that's Charles H. Koch, Administrative Law and Practice, 1, 2 and 2 edited, and from 1997. So you've got to consider again what we said before, that if you're an employee of the government or state, then all this is what you're governed by. So you then, if you're bringing these people to book, need to know parts of this, because you need to know when they're stepping off the mandate. Yeah. Then they're in fraud or, whatever other words that they've got. I always think aim for fraud because it's criminal. You know, they can get away with the lesser distinctions that they've given themselves for throwing at you. But when you know that, you know, that's they're telling you these people are governed by this system of administrative law, which is what all the states doing all the time. So your police, they're not really the judiciary, these star courts, you know, civil servants, etc. These are their rules, administrative law, and if they can bag it and throw that onto you, then you know you've ID'd as the person. You've not understood the trust relationship and the fact that you are the rightful beneficiary. But of course, you can't be acting out in that capacity, which is why I suggest you use, you make sure you explain that you, as the settler for the trust, the same trust, you can then act and you can instruct. So of course, as Christopher Hauser will tell you, as long as the national insurance number or social security number for the US is in this mix or this trust action, then they are under a fiduciary obligation in this matter. So they're a trustee with a fiduciary obligation. And the obligation is, it has to benefit the beneficiary. Yeah, that's the basis of the trust situation in relation to the person that you've got. So you're using it as a shield, but you're never identifying as it. The old blag of this Admiralty Maritime, the Prussian blag, is to have you identify as the person, because then you're dead, you need to be represented by one of the court officers, as it were, who has to be relieved from his position if he's going to offer a plea for you. You don't want anybody offering a plea for you, because as the beneficiary, you can't make a plea, because you can't act like that for the trust. And if anybody else is going to make the plea, then they can't, unless you've given them power of attorney, which you haven't. Because of settler, you've explained that they're now in a fiduciary obligation. How are they going to benefit the beneficiary? Do you get it? The basis of it, that's because you have to master that before you can start actually acting on what Chris is giving you. And he's giving you verbatim, you know what I mean? And if he's not sure about something or he hasn't achieved it yet, he'll tell you. You can't ask for more than that. Nobody's leading you down any merry dance. But it's so important that you grasp this stuff. You need to know what their rules are, that they have to work, so you know if they're breaching them, and you know how then to attack them on that, you know? If you're going to set a lien. Which is, to be honest, what I need to focus to, this lien situation. So that's what I'm doing. Now, this is an interesting concept. A fiant. Okay. Clearing the slate. Affidavit of foreign status. The affidavit of foreign status is a public notice to all interested parties concerning the affiant's birthright and his status as an American inhabitant. As the status would apply with respect to the American states, the 50 independent states of the Union, with respect to the United States as follows: that the undersigned affiant was naturally born as a free sovereign in affiant state of birth, which is one of the sovereign states of the Union of several states joined together comprising the confederation known as the United States of America. It's a corporation. So it's a confederation of corporations. It's not as was originally. But it is the rule book for the state. It is the constitution. The affiant is therefore a non-resident alien individual residing in the United States, which entity obtains its exclusive legislative authority and jurisdiction from Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17, and Article 4, Section 3, Clause 2 of the Constitution for the United States of America. The affiant's parents were sovereigns also, born in sovereign states of the Union. As the progeny of sovereign people, the affiant was born one of the sovereign people, a constituent member of the sovereignty, synonymous with the people. And that's shown in Scott Sanford 19 HOW 404. The affiant is alien to a so-called 14th Amendment United States citizen, a non-resident to so-called 14th. So I've touched on that I'm not a resident of the UK. I'm a man on England. I'm not a resident of the UK. I'm not a resident of Accrington, my own town. You know what I'm saying? I'm not a resident of an address. Yeah? This kind of grasp is also essential when you started to understand the other forced joinder they've got going through properties, through being resident, exactly. It's important. So that is affiant in relation to bonus-free sovereign, but we don't use a sovereign as I encourage because they've got a preset script for that, and it can just get you pissed off and they just bag you and bug you. Better not to use anything they've got some preset. So you're a man in the image of the Creator on the land. You are not party to this. However, the trust is. But you've you've presented your standing with the trust and understood you don't do anything as a beneficiary. If you go into a court and you're claiming the beneficiary, you can't then start pleading because the beneficiary doesn't do anything. It just benefits from all actions brought against the trust. Yeah, and once you establish that standing, then everybody else in respect to that action is a fiduciary, under a fiduciary obligation as trustee, and they have to furnish the trust. They can't harm it in any way. So the prosecutor then would have to pay all concerned and damages to the beneficiary once you've established this position. Do you get that? It's important. It's really, really important. And you do this in paperwork, as I've said. You're looking for chancery as having the rights of the beneficiary upheld. So you go through the motions, but as long as you've got the paperwork showing that you presented yourself as beneficiary and that you're aware that all concerned are in a fiduciary obligation role, you're building a case for chancery. You know what I'm saying? So you don't have to pat yourself about whatever's going on because you're not actually going to go to the court, are you? Yeah. And of course, I put in a start date and charge schedule, and then you've got the conditional acceptance, etc. going in. Yeah. End of service, all that kind of stuff. Because you've put them on contract then, and you set the law of that contract. Yeah. And the charges thereof is the charge schedule. And I've said to you before, it will be me personally. I mean, remember, I'm not giving legal advice ever on here because I'm not qualified to give legal advice and I'm not a member of the Bar Society. What I'm giving you is what I've done coming up against this system. And of course, in order to do that, there's things you've got to understand about their system and how it works. So I'm not giving legal advice. I'm giving you or presenting what I've done, what I understand in relation to if you so choose to do battle or act in accordance with your rights when this system comes a calling. What's this one? What is it? It's coming up as apostrophe. So this is Council-Ax. It says, Stratos, an army. Stratagem, a goal, an artifice in war, a trick. Stratocracy, a karatos, a military government. Strophe, so is this, a turning round. So. Apostrophe, a turning from the persons present to address the absent or dead. A mark, showing that a word is contracted. Catastrophe, a final event, a calamity. So this strophe, yeah, the precursing word is determining the turning around. Do you get that? So that's an interesting bit of data to know. Yeah? Again, Prussian, Admiralty, a maritime parading as a front for the Prussian naval law. So I thought that were exceptionally interesting as well. Yeah? So Stratos and Strophe turning around. And that it's sort of contracted with the turnaround, as it were. So that's a bit of trickery wizardry going down. So definition of a bill of lading. I mean, I'm just putting these, they're just things that I've picked up and I thought, well, I'll keep them. Well, you know, let's make them available to everybody. So this is a paper, 3rd December 2008. It's to do with paper available online. It says, you know, on the other hand, is evidence that establishes the truth of a fact, which cannot be contradicted by any other evidence. Bill of Lading. So, I've missed something out there. In other words, any proof of the contrary is not permissible. A typical example of conclusive evidence in trade is the negotiable bill of lading. International conventions recognise a bill of lading as conclusive evidence of rights to take possession of the transported goods. Although, so this is something to do with bailiffs. And when a bill of lading is transferred to a third party in good faith, this third party has the right to take possession of the goods, and any proof of the contrary is not admissible. Have we put this out when we did the bailiff one? I'm not sure. So the bill of lading is conclusive proof. So that for instance, a negotiable right to possession of goods in transit defines the functionality of a negotiable bill of lading, and a privilege to export a certain commodity defines the functionality of an exporting license. In paper-based procedures, when the exporter or your mother delivers the goods to the carrier, the state, the carrier issues a document, namely the bill of lading. Also, this is about birth, right? According to international conventions, the bill of lading is conclusive evidence of rights. Any person who legally possesses the bill of lading is the person who owns the goods. And the transfer of the right to goods is done simply by transferring the possession of the bill of lading. As mentioned earlier, the uniqueness of a paper document can be afforded by its physical attributes. By handing over the bill of lading to another, one no longer holds the document. Moving to an electronic environment, the problem is that a digital document can be duplicated bit for bit, so that copies are indistinguishable from the original. After transferring the electronic bill of lading to another party, the transferring party may still retain an identical copy, which could be used to claim possession of the goods. So I think I found this and thought you were a bit excited about it, because we know they're moving us into this avatar system. And this is an issue and problem that is going to arise in relation to the certificate of evidence that we are rightful beneficiary to the trusts. So that's why I kept that. Any thoughts on that? Might be interesting. Let's have a look. A definition of a birth certificate. Taking your birth certificate to court. The courts only want to charge some bogus bonds to your federal account. And that's your NI, National Insurance Account. And they need your bond or permission to do so, to do the discharge. Otherwise, you must pay a fine and go to jail. But they neglected to tell us that the birth certificate is the bond. And the birth certificate is proof that we are the beneficiary and not the trustee of our strawman trust account. The state is the trustee. Yeah? So as I said, you get yourself into that understanding that you as beneficiary can't act in any way, shape, or form. You can't incriminate the beneficiary either. So you can't do anything. But once you establish that fact, and then if you want to issue any commands or anything, you will settle. You'll do so settle it. All else are in a fiduciary obligation. And if they refuse then they're in trouble. That's where the liens come in, etc. So it's important that we understand this aspect of things to fully understand what a lien being set against somebody is. Because the threat of it is enough to have them comply in most cases. So the state is a trustee. Everything including crime and tax is already prepaid through the birth certificate bond. Yeah. So everything relating to your trust, you as beneficiary, is prepaid. This is where 1099 stuff starts to come into play. Yeah. In every case, but I know a lot of people are struggling to understand just a lot of what Chris is saying, because there's so much to understand first. And some people are a bit put off by it, but this is the kind of stuff that I would encourage you to get to grips with, so that you understand the concept of it. Because then you can start to understand what it is you're actually doing if you're going to follow through on his education. In every case so far, the charges were settled. In every case so far, the charges were settled, and they let the fellow go without a record of crime by surrendering the birth certificate. Now, I tried to do that in court when I went last, and they were having none of it. Using COVID and everything, somebody's grandma had a fit about, we're giving it, oh, God, and I just thought, fuck off, you bunch of fucking wankers. And then I went off into my performance and just thought, you're going to take the piss? Fuck you, I'll take the piss. And just watching the prosecution on a video call, a jaw were on the fucking table. Unbelievable. Anyway, let's not digress. Further, the birth certificate proves that you are the beneficiary of your strawman estate. The prosecutor is claiming, well, no, because the strawman doesn't have an estate. The strawman is created off your real estate. The prosecutor is claiming that he represents the beneficiary of the state, when the state is really supposed to be the trustee. So when you bring the birth certificate into court, you discharge all of the charges against you, and you prove that you are the beneficiary of your trust estate. And this completely shuts the prosecutor down. But what it does, it puts him into the fiduciary role and obligation to benefit the beneficiary is what it does. Yeah? But you don't really want to go to court. But if you ever do, these are the kind of things you need to know. Yeah? The prosecutor now has no standing. Well, he has. He's a fiduciary trustee. That's his standing. You can never say you don't have standing. You don't have standing in the case, but he does have standing, but as a trustee in a fiduciary obligation. You bringing in the birth certificate proves that he has brought fraud into the court by claiming to be the beneficiary instead of you. Only the beneficiary, you, can be the plaintiff, and only the trustee, the state, can be the defendant. So only the beneficiary can be a plaintiff. Yeah. So plaintiff is for beneficiary. Defendant is for the dead. Yeah. Only the trustee, the state, can be the defendant. Yeah. I do not give legal advice, but this is what I would do if I were in your shoes. So that's, somebody's put that in a book and then covers the glass. Okay, now this is another one that I've got down as a definition of birth certificate, but it's a definition of certificate. Okay, it says, certificate, paper establishing an ownership claim. Also, an assertion of facts. 1. Bank charter or certificate of authority issued by a chartering agency authorising a newly organised bank to open for business. Certificate of deposit, a receipt for a time deposit. Certificate of accounts, an auditor's opinion filed by a certified public accountant after examination of an organisation's books and records. Certificate of title, evidencing ownership of real estate or personal property. Certificate of claim, A borrower's written promise to reimburse a lender for certain credit costs. For example, debt collection costs. So they have to have a certificate of claim. And a borrower's written promise to reimburse. Safekeeping certificate issued by custodian for a certificate of deposit, stock certificate, or other security assigned to a new nominee. Yeah? So when you send in your coupon through this 1099 system, if they don't give it you back, yeah, they've gone with it. And as Chris says, that's when you come in with the your what do you call it? I forgot what they call it now. God, oh shit. I can't remember. I will remember it. So protest certificate issued by a bank refusing to honour a cheque. So that's a So if a cheque, it's a protest certificate if they're letting somebody know that they're not honoured a cheque. And then a certificate of indebtedness. A certificate of accounts, savings certificate. Certificate for authorising, amortising revolving debt card. Asset-backed securities consisting of bank credit card receivables issued in 1986 by the Solomon Brothers. This expected life of the securities is short, about 2 years, and securities pay only interest for a specific period. So a certificate is basically a piece of paper establishing ownership claim, and it's an assertion of the facts. So that's what all certificates are. They have a meaning dependent on what the certificate is. There's another definition of birth certificate here. Certificate means any certificate, instrument, or other document of or evidencing title to units of a security. Okay? So that's what a certificate is. Yeah? So it's an instrument, of evidence. It's an evidencing instrument. Yeah? And is your evidence that you are the rightful beneficiary. You are not the trust. Interest in a security means any legal or equitable interest or right in relation to a security, including an absolute or contingent right to acquire a security created, allotted, or issued, or to be created, allotted, or issued, and the interests or rights of a person for whom a security is held on trust or by a custodian or depository. Issue in relation to a new unit of a security means to confer title to a new unit on a person. Okay? So interest in a security means any legal or equitable interest. So equity, you see, this is why you get your paperwork together, then you go into the Chancery, which is about equity, the rights of equity or beneficiary, yeah? Equitable rights. Can you see? So the certificate is all important, yeah? And as long as you're taking on the right as beneficiary, and then you understand how to keep that position, and then you know what they're doing wrong, so you can tell them or remind them. You're getting there. Whatever they rule, you're going straight to Chancery. As long as you've got your paperwork together, and you have the equitable right to it, you're going to win. And another one, definition of birth certificates. Have a look. When you were born, your parents register with the government as corporation by receiving and signing a birth certificate. And if you use your corporation, will receive a taxpayer ID code, a social security number. This is so you can be used as a collateral for the government to acquire debt. That's right. You and your labour, time and energy is what backs up the national debt. You are a stock. Definition birth. So what's this on? This is, I don't know what is a problem. Birth night. Nox natas. Birthplace, solemn natal. Oh, so it's a new birth, generational nova. So it's Latin, isn't it? This. The afterbirth, secundae. The birth or bringing forth of anything. Partial, futura, fetus, ortus. To give birth to a thing. To give birth to a thing, which is the placenta. Because it's the thing. To give birth to a thing, which has life, and we have a video that we did a long time, Frankenstein's monster. If you want to take a look at that, but that's something we did a long time ago, so that's what that's talking to. After birth. Secundae, the birth or bringing forth of anything. Partial, futura, fetus, ortus, which is to give birth to a thing. Yeah? So, it says the beginning of a thing, or Latin, the space in which a ship can carry hitherto. He obtained gifts of a seaman. Hive set, a seaman. Yeah, seaman. Waters, get in. Profitable cruise. Lacrosum navigationum. Fecit. See, this is why they took Latin out of our education systems at all levels of our societies. We haven't got a clue what we're doing. You know? No idea. Definition births. So, now then, this is Birth, Deaths and Registrations Act 1953. Law in force, 3A. Registrations of births of abandoned children. Were the place and date of birth of a child who is abandoned or unknown to and cannot be ascertained by the person who was charged of the child, the person may apply to the Registrar General for the child's birth to be registered under this section. On an application under this section, the Registrar General shall enter a register trained at the General Register Office as the child's place of birth, if the child was found by the applicant or by any person from whom directly or indirectly the applicant took charge of the child, the registration district and sub-district where the child was found, or in any other case where the child was abandoned. Well, they say you abandon the birth, the afterbirth, don't you? And just as a reminder, anybody giving birth, you do not cut that cord until all the blood in the placenta has gone back to the child. This is why so many children are ill, and then that's why they want to shot them at an early age as well. Remember that. As the child's date of birth, the date which, having regard to such evidence as is produced to him, appears to him to be the most likely date of birth of the child, and such that other particulars as may be prescribed, the Registrar General shall not register a child birth under this section if he is satisfied that the child was not born in England, or Wales. See, they say in England. It's got to be on England, or Wales, or B, the child has been adopted in pursuance of a court order made in the United Kingdom, the Isle of Man, or the Channel Islands, or subject to subsection 5 below, the child's birth is known to have been previously registered under this Act. 4. If no entry can be traced to any register, where is that? Where? Hang on. So any person, wait a minute. If no entry can be traced by any register of birth relating to a person who has attained the age of 18 and has not been adopted as aforesaid, that person may apply to the Registrar General for his birth to be registered under this section. On the application of a person having the charge of a child whose birth had been registered under this Act, by virtue of the proviso to section 1 of this Act as originally enacted, or B, any such child who has attained the age of 18 years, the Registrar General shall re-register the birth of the child under this section and shall direct the officer having custody of the register of births in which the entry relating to the child was previously made to enter in the margin of the registrar a reference to the re-registration of the birth, And then notes. 3A inserted by Children's Act 1975, 72, 92. Power to amend Act conferred to Public Expenditure and Receipts Act of 1968. C14 5 SCH3. Power to extend Act conferred by British Nationality Act in 1981. Right, so they've given themselves the ability to mess around with that as well. So that's a bit interesting stuff on the old person. So I'm going to leave it there because we've done the births. We've gone up to births because there's plenty more, as you can see, that we can go through. I'm going to go through Culpepper's. Just 2 on the Culpepper's because I've kept you long enough. I do apologise. So I'll just have a look at what you were saying. Evening old mucker, I'll lads at him. Right, I'm good. Very easy to see on our V5 document that we are ready to keep it. No, yeah, exactly. Washington DO right to order me to send them my title. Car accident by the insured state of Washington said it will be destroyed. I want to bet you on that. Romans, yeah. So we now did destroy it. They have no longer any threats on ship. I have been planning on writing the car by not in relation. Good. All right. I'm not going to do a Culpepper's this week. We're going to leave it because I've just noticed we're 2 hours. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to leave with you another little ditty of mine that I put together just to end this this video, and I will say till the next time. And thanks for taking part. And Ray, thanks for all you do, mate. I know you're doing it background, so thanks for that. And I will see you again. Till the next time.
For gender dysphoria. Get that? For gender dysphoria. He said, "We do not know who the transgender kids are for gender dysphoria." Sink in. They cannot actually identify who trans kids are except by them saying so.